we're committing a slight breach of etiquette by opening the floodgates at 6:29, but you were all waiting so patiently, we figured, oh, just in.
Yeah, good.
All right, now it's officially 6:30.
There you go.
So welcome everybody to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for Thursday, whatever today's date is, May 19th, 2022. Tonight's meeting will be on warblers, and I was really legitimately surprised when I looked back and realized, we've never done warblers. We've had a meeting that was just on yellow-rumped warbler, which was a fun meeting. I like that. And warblers have, been part of some of our other meetings, certainly. We've never had a meeting devoted to warblers, so I'm very happy that we have a meeting devoted to warblers. Before we get going, I'm just going to mention a few quick things. This Saturday, we will have an outing, a group outing of Carpinteria Birdwatchers, and we will be going to see the snowy plovers at Carpinteria State Beach. If you've been paying attention to the website at carpbirdwatchers.org, you know this already, or if you've been bird watching down on the beach, you know this already. But the snowy plovers are nesting again this year. So last year we had our historic first successful nesting at that location in 60 years. And this year there have so far been 2 nests that have hatched. So there are 2 sets of babies running around on the beach down there now, an older set that's just about to fly away, and then a younger set that just hatched a couple days ago. And then there are 2 other nests that are in progress with eggs in them. So that's, at least 4 nests with eggs and or babies that we're talking about that have been there this year, and it's still fairly early in the breeding season. So it's very exciting, and it's certainly a great trend to see that snowy plovers appear to be coming back to that bit of beach. A number of us are volunteering to be docents down there and kind of talk to the people at the beach about what's going on with these plovers, why is this fencing here, and what's the story. So that should be a lot of fun. And I think we're starting that officially this weekend. So if you're down there this weekend and you see someone in a vest talking about plovers, come and say hi, because it will probably be me or Tom or Laurel or some of the other people who are volunteering. And it should be a lot of fun. I mean, we've been unofficially docenting down there already. We've been, checking out the plovers and talking to anyone who will stand still long enough for us to talk about them. But now we'll be doing it more officially with a vest and everything. So that should be great. And then what was the other announcement? Oh, and I also wanted to mention there's this thing going on with the brown pelicans locally. And if you've been reading the SPCO birding email list, you already know about this. But something, potentially bad, well, definitely bad, is going on with the brown pelicans locally. There are a lot of sick and dying pelicans showing up on the beaches. The Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network has taken in a bunch of them and is trying to nurse them back to health. There's big flocks of pelicans down at the seal haul out in Carpinteria. Tom and Laurel are volunteers down there, and I've been down there and seeing literally hundreds of pelicans on the beach just hanging out there. So it's not really clear what's going on. I went back and looked, did a Google search, and there have been some sort of similar events at intervals over the last few decades where, there's a big die-off, and, on some level, it could just be sort of normal-ish fluctuations of the food supply, and there's just not enough fish right now for the pelicans, and so they're spreading out and showing up in weird places as they try to get enough food, and some of them are not getting enough food. So anyway, we'll keep our eyes on that. But if you see a lot of pelicans or you see some brown pelicans in an unusual place, that could well be part of that event that's going on. And there is a phone number you can call for the Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network, and it is on the, I posted on the Carp Birdwatchers website about it, and I should have had this ready to go. But there are links to all the things I'm talking about in the description for the YouTube video where this live stream is going to be archived, and on the webpage at carpbirdwatchers.org about this meeting. But the link would take you to this post on the Carp Birdwatchers website. I can just share my screen and show you what it looks like. Let me do that. Here we go. So here is this posting at Carp Birdwatchers, and I quote from an email from the Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network. But basically, here is their number. So if you see a bird that you think needs help, you can call them at 805-681-1080. Find a deceased bird, please do not touch or handle it. And hopefully the pelicans will get through this situation. And we'll be back to full health shortly. Okay, so that was it for my announcements. I talked about the outing. Did I talk about the outing? Yes, I briefly talked about the outing. I didn't give the details. So this Saturday at 8 o'clock, we're meeting at the south end of Linden Avenue. So down Linden Avenue down at the beach. And we're going to meet there, and then we're going to walk down the beach to where the snowy plovers are and check them out and then come back. So 8 to 10 a.m. this coming Saturday. So any other questions? Anything exciting that people have seen bird-wise they want to share? If not, we can jump into warblers. Yeah, Paul.
So I just got back from my usual nature deficit disorder cure. I call it backpacking. And I was in Blue Canyon, and it was really interesting just sitting there in the evening, only person in the campsite there, listening to a common poorwill. And I'd never heard of a common poorwill. I had to do a little research on it too and find out it's a solitary bird and I don't know much about them, but it was the first time I heard with them. It was kind of exciting just to hear that poorwill, and they have this kind of like the sound, so it sounds like a poor will stutter here too. So anyway, that was really exciting for me to hear a common goodwill. Goodwill.
And that was
goodwill.
Blue
Poorwill.
Canyon,
Yeah, it's Blue Canyon campsite. You know, the Four Bush, Cottom, Blue Canyon. It's right over the hill from here. If you go north Romero or Cold Springs, you dump into Blue Canyon.
Neat.
And there's four popular campsites there, and I tend to kind of maintain them and make sure I didn't see a single person for 3 days. That's because water's running out down there, and it's going to be a very limited camping season, except if you know where the springs are. If you know where the springs are, then you can kind of hang out. So the birds hang out there too also, I understand. But lots of other birds here too, house wrens, and geez, it was just, I had to put earplugs in the morning. There was so much bird activity here. It's too loud for me in the morning.
That sounds wonderful. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. But
those poorwills they're very cool. I love hearing them, and they're just like very evocative. This poor will. Sound that they make.
Exactly. That's it. That sounds.
I'd like to actually play it. It would be a much better version of it than me imitating. But
and another question I have, you mentioned about blue pelicans. I've been walking out of Bacara, noticed that they have a lot of brants, cormorants out there, and there's a number of them that are on the beach dead. Do you just leave them there, or what do you do with cormorants?
Yeah, I mean, if they're dead, I don't think there's much you can do. Probably you should not handle them.
Right.
If they're not dead, I mean, if they're alive in distress, you could call the Wildlife Care Network. Their resources are pretty strained right now, is my understanding.
Yes.
But they certainly want to hear from people, and if they have the resources, they will bring in birds like that and work on taking care of them. When there's oil spills and things, they do a lot of cormorant rehab.
Oh, they do. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, and then there was one other thing I need to mention. I'm going to try and finish this meeting by 7:30 because I actually have a thing I need to go do. So even more than usual, I'm really focusing on the time, and I really want to talk about warblers. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump on into the warblers now, and we will talk about warblers. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. I don't think I did that correctly. Nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try again. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. So why is it not giving me the option? Yeah, I'm not sure. Here we go. This is what I want. All right, so in this meeting, we will be talking about warblers, and I've divided the warbler talk up into two parts because there's a lot of things to be said about warblers, and I didn't think I could cover it all in one meeting. So this is part one, where we're just going to be talking about the 9 more common species that we see here in Santa Barbara County. And then I think closer to the fall, which is kind of when you have the chance to see the rarer warblers, or your best chance to see the rarer warblers, we'll have part 2. So for now, we're just going to talk about the more common ones. So a little bit of sort of general fun facts about warblers before we get into talking about the species. So what are warblers? Well, they are a New World family of birds, Parulidae, that are primarily insectivorous. So they have this, long pointy beak that they use for eating the insects that are their chosen food. There's sometimes, this group is referred to as the wood warblers, and this helps distinguish them from the old world warblers, which are the sort of original warblers. And then when the Europeans came to the Americas, they said, oh, look, small birds with pointy beaks, you've got warblers here. And it's a completely different group of birds. So the old world warblers are a different family. And there's also an Australian group of birds that probably got named warblers the same way, which again are still yet another group of birds that are not terribly closely related. So we're just going to be talking about the New World wood warblers. And there are about 120 species of them. So there's a lot. And about half of those are highly migratory and breed in North America, north of Mexico. So really, when I'm, as a North America, north of Mexico centric bird watcher, like my field guides have always been for that part of the world, these are what I think of as the warblers, is the ones that come into the US and Canada. And so what makes them so cool? So it is a joke at this point that every group of birds I talk about in one of these meetings is incredibly cool. And I always feel like I have to make the case for why they're so cool. But in the case of warblers, it's really true. Warblers really are incredibly cool. In fact, I think you could make a case that the Parulidae, the wood warblers of the New World, are probably as responsible as any bird group out there for the popularity of bird watching in North America, because I think they really are amazing lures to bring people into the activity. They're colorful and they're very active. So watching a warbler is a very satisfying thing. They don't just stand there. I mean, they're not just drab, or they're colorful, and they're very exciting to watch. And they're incredibly varied. So, through the evolutionary process, they have come to, especially in the brightly colored adult males, they're very distinctive looking. I mean, they're not just pretty looking, but they're different looking. So it's sort of like the original Pokemon, they're like all these cool little interesting things that are all different from each other. And it just activates, at least in someone like me, this urge to, collect them. You must collect them all. You must go see these amazingly diverse group and get all of them, or as many of them as you can. And their migrations are really spectacular. And again, this is not going to be a really good overview of warblers in general. This is more a few things about warblers that I think of when I think about warblers. And the fact is that the spring warbler migration, especially in the eastern half of North America, is just an incredible spectacle, and probably is the thing most responsible for me being a bird watcher today. Because when I was 12, I was sort of a casual bird watcher, but I went and lived in Florida for about 6 months, and it happened to coincide with the spring migration, and it just rocked my world to be out there and have a dozen different species, literally, of these birds I'd only seen in field guides up till then, and always thought, wow, that would be an amazing bird to see. And suddenly I was surrounded by them, and it's a very exciting experience, and I was hooked. And I don't know, I want to talk a little bit about that migration. And I don't mean to badmouth West Coast warblers. West Coast warblers are great, okay? And the warblers we see here, some of the species of warblers we see here, they don't get in the East. So, they're envious of us for our special species that they don't get to see. But in terms of that spectacle of the mixed flock warbler migration, the eastern half of the country is really where it's at, because there's a lot of species there, and they come through in big numbers. This is a site called Birdcast, and I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but it's really cool. And what they're basically doing there is they're using weather radar, and by adjusting the way the weather radar is configured to work, they can switch it from its normal mode. So normally weather radar ignores birds and dust and stuff in order to look at precipitation and weather events. Well, they can adjust those filters and say, oh no, ignore the precipitation, just show me the birds. And you can actually see migrating birds using weather radar. And so they're able to gather data on when are these birds actually doing their migration. And they can correlate that with weather patterns and wind and the date. And it lets them make these predictions. So you can go to this site and see for any of the next few nights, this was for May 15th when I made this slide, where is the most intense songbird migration going to be happening? And it's not just warblers, but warblers are a big part of it. And you can see there are just certain areas where there's really high intensity of migrating birds. And if you're a bird watcher and you see that, you go, oh, I'm going to go bird watching tomorrow morning and see all these millions of birds that have come in. And it can be very exciting. Some places that are famous amongst North American bird watchers for just this reason I want to talk about. One of them is the Texas Gulf Coast. And this is where you see this phenomenon of fallout. And I don't know if you saw the movie, the Big Year, where they sort of dramatized with Steve Martin and Jack Black and Owen Wilson, the birders running around competing for their Big Year list. They get very excited about the fallout in Texas. They all have to go to the spring fallout. So what fallout is you have these millions of birds that are moving north from the tropics where they've wintered, and they need to cross the Gulf of Mexico. So they kind of queue up here in this in the Yucatan Peninsula. And then when the conditions are right, they take off and they cross the Gulf of Mexico. And it's 650 plus miles. And warblers can't land in that water. They've got to do that nonstop, or they will drown if they run out of gas. And what will happen sometimes is as they're making the crossing, weather will move in, they'll get a front will come in, or northerly winds or northwesterly winds. And it actually becomes really difficult for the warblers to make that crossing, but they're committed at that point. So, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of birds just don't make it, like they fall into the Gulf of Mexico. But if you're on the coast here, when these conditions are happening, you'll see these birds coming in, and because they're exhausted, they just drop down to the first piece of solid ground they can find, whether or not there's much cover there. And you can literally just walk around and see, dozens of species of these neotropical migrants just sitting there on the ground, like pretty much oblivious to your presence, because they're just so exhausted. They need to rest, they need to get food. And, bird watchers are the last thing they're worried about. So it's very exciting. I do share in the notes for this meeting a link to a YouTube video where Ian Davies, who's a bird watcher who's been working on doing live streaming of bird watching. And if you're someone like me, I liked the movie The Big Year, but I really wanted it to be a documentary. I felt like, the drama keeps getting in the way of the birds that I'm really interested in. Ian Davies' live stream of the Texas fallout that he broadcast on April 26th was really fun to watch. And you get to basically see what these fallout conditions are like from a bird watcher's perspective. Another place that's famous for spring migration is McGee Marsh in Northwest Ohio on the shore of Lake Erie. And again, Ian took his rig up there, and on May 11th, he did a live stream from there, and I linked to that in the links for this meeting. Again, really exciting. There's an event up there called the Biggest Week in American Birding, which I've never been to, but it looks pretty big. If you watch his live stream, you're in that situation where you're sort of elbowing through hundreds of bird watchers on this boardwalk and seeing, 15 species of warblers and tanagers and all kinds of stuff just surrounding them. It's very cool. And then one last place I'll talk about is Tatasek, which is up on the St. Lawrence River. And again, it's in each of these situations, there's basically some kind of barrier that sort of funnels the migrating birds into one specific spot. And if you're a bird watcher and you can put yourself in that spot, you can get this really exciting experience. So Ian Davies, again, he's obviously very into this. Back in 2018, he posted this eBird list that a lot of us eBird obsessives were excited to read at the time. And it even got written up in the New York Times. And, again, it's very cool to see what it's like to be there and have 500,000 migrant songbirds come past you in the course of a day. So I encourage you to check all that out. All right, but because I'm trying to go fast, we'll bring this closer to home and talk about Carpinteria. And some of the good places to go watch warblers around Carpinteria. I mean, you can basically watch warblers pretty much anywhere because they've adapted and radiated out through all the available niches. So there's warblers all over the place. But some places that are especially good to see them are Toro Canyon Park. I've been having a good time seeing warblers there this spring. Franklin Park, which is a little tiny park, little pocket park in Carpinteria, right at the start of the Franklin Trail. And it's small, but it's got it's got some good sized trees in it. And they planted a grove of oaks that are starting to get pretty decent size there as well. And it has a lot of warblers. It's a really cool spot to see them. Carpinteria Creek is a famous, well, locally famous, regionally famous spot to go see warblers. The 8th Street Bridge over Carpinteria Creek is a really fun spot to go warbler watching because you're basically up there at the level of the canopy. Warbler neck is a thing where you're constantly looking, you're constantly looking skyward to try and see these little warblers up in the canopy, and it can, make your neck sore after a while. But if you're up on this bridge, you're actually closer to the action and you don't have to crane your neck so much. So it's a good spot to go see warblers. And this sounds weird, but the parking lot of the Smart and Final on Linden Avenue is a great place to see warblers. You have to, if you're me and a little bit, self-conscious, you have to overcome the fact that here I am walking around with my binoculars and camera while people are parking to go into Smart and Final. But if you can get past that, it's worth it because there's really good birding there. There are tipuana trees planted there, these tipu trees, birders tend to call them. And they're a non-native ornamental tree that's planted in a lot of places in Southern California and have these associated insects that live on them that migrating warblers really like. So tipuana trees are a really good spot to check out warblers. And there's a bunch of them in that parking lot and in the city parking lot that's just north of there as well. So during warbler migration time, there's often, a dozen or more warblers in just one of those trees. So it's a really great place to go check them out. And let's see. Oh, and one other place I want to mention. So Romero Canyon, the Romero Canyon Trail up in Montecito. If you hike up that, especially if you hike up about a half a mile to the part where you leave the fire road and you're on just the regular hiking trail as it continues to follow the creek up canyon, there's some really nice warbler habitat up there, some nice big trees, and I've had a lot of fun checking out the warblers there this spring. And then if you continue to follow that upward, actually, I think, do I have a slide that shows this? Let me see. Yeah, so this is basically above Romero Canyon, looking back towards the ocean. This is like a Google Earth view. So here's the trailhead down here. And the trail kind of winds up through the canyon like this. And there's a fire road that kind of winds up this way. And there's a trail that comes up this way. But if you drive all the way up to, a couple ways to get there, but basically if you drive up to the 154 and you go up to Camino Cielo and you drive along East Camino Cielo all the way back to this point, which is where the pavement ends at Romero Saddle, this really interesting thing sometimes happens there. And these are called morning flights of migrants. And this happens a lot in the spring migration at a place called Bear Divide down in Los Angeles County. And there's an ongoing bird survey effort that happens there. And I've got a link to that if you want to check it out. But basically the idea is that for the most part, these small passerine migrants, including warblers, they migrate at night. They basically, when the evening comes, they take off, they go up, relatively high in the air and they travel towards their destination. And at the end of the evening, they drop down again. And then they spend the day, resting or feeding or recovering. And then they fly again at night. Well, sometimes under certain conditions, and I think what tends to produce these conditions here is if there's a strong northerly wind blowing, the migrants will get displaced. This is a theory, I don't know how true this is, but they'll get displaced out into the coastal plain. And then when it starts to get light out, they're like, oh, we're in the wrong place. We need to get over these mountains and get inland, get further north. And so there will be this period of time from about 7 to 8 a.m. So just for an hour or so, where there's this big movement of migrants. And if you're in the spot that concentrates them, you can see a big movement of migrants going by. And Romero Saddle here is a good spot to see that. So it doesn't happen all the time. And again, it's a little bit weird to drive for an hour. You basically drive a half hour east to Santa or west to Santa Barbara, then a half hour east back on East Camino Cielo. And when you're done, like, I can see my house. I've been driving for an hour. I haven't gotten anywhere. But I was up there on late April, a couple of years ago, when one of these morning flights came through. And it was just really cool to see. You know, I basically saw about 500 migrating birds in the course of an hour. And if you're not a birder, maybe you just know, oh, there's a lot of birds around. But if you're actually paying attention to them and trying to count them and identify them, you're like, wow, you know, I saw, 30 lazuli buntings just went by, and there was another 450 birds I couldn't identify because they were moving too quick. So it's a lot of fun. So if you're into that sort of thing, we have cool places where you can see this kind of thing. Okay. So enough about general fun facts. Let's talk about the actual warblers. Let's collect our Pokemon. These are the 9 species that I'm going to talk about in this talk. Again, these are the 9 most easily seen species in Santa Barbara County. And I'm going to break them down by time of year because, again, they're highly migratory, and certain times of year you can see some of them, but not others. And then it switches, and then we'll see. We'll talk about that in detail. But before I jump into that, I've just been motor mouthing. Are there questions? People have comments, input? I need a drink of water anyway, so think of something to ask while I'm drinking my water. Going once. All right, you all just want to see more warblers. Who could blame you? Because they're gorgeous. Okay, so I'm going to talk first about breeding species. So these are 4 species of warblers that actually nest in our area. So here we have the eBird histogram for these 4 species. So again, the thickness of the green bar shows you the percentage of eBird checklists that include that species in that week of the year. So it's just a way of seeing, throughout the year, when do we have them here? So first off, we have the orange-crowned warbler. And you see it has a pretty thick bar for pretty much the whole year. Like, this is a species you can find pretty much any day of the year if you go out in the right habitat. There is a swelling in the spring and again in the fall, which when we look at their migration pattern in a minute, you'll see there's a lot of orange-crowned warblers that breed elsewhere that just move through here during those times of year. But there's also a substantial number of them that stay and breed here. So that's why you have that thick green bar for every month of the year. Common yellowthroat, even more so. It's just here all the time, pretty much. And again, there are yellowthroats that migrate through here on their way somewhere else, but there's also a good-sized population of them that stay here all year. The yellow warbler is different. We really don't have them here in the winter. I mean, there's a little bit of a green line here in the winter months, and that kind of reflects the Christmas count scouting efforts where, there's like one of them. And it's showing up in lists because people are like making sure they have it for the Christmas count, or there's a few of them, but they're small numbers. But really they show up, in late March and on into April, and breed here. And then when they're breeding through these June, July months, and then there's a big swelling in the spring and another big swelling in the fall. And that again reflects that there's a lot of them that move through here. Right? They breed throughout much of North America, and a lot of those, at least the Western populations, come down the Pacific Flyway. But they also do breed here if you're in the right habitat. And finally, the Wilson's warbler, which is a pretty similar pattern to the yellow warbler in terms of its occurrence around here. A little more easy to find in the winter months. Okay, but that's the basic, those are our 4 breeding species. And then to look at them in a little more detail, so I've decided, just to make my life easier, I'm just going to link to the eBird site's version of this. So this will take just a second. So can you see the orange-crowned warbler? Give me a thumbs up if that's okay. Excellent. So this is your basic orange-crowned warbler. you know, it's interesting in that its field mark is that it doesn't really have prominent field marks. You know, it's a lot of these warblers have very dramatic, bold patterns, at least in the adult males. And the orange-crowned warbler, not so much. But if you pay attention to it, you do start to notice things. It's got this overall kind of olive color. It has these eye arcs. It has like a light eye ring, not super prominent, but it's there, especially if you're close enough to get a good look. But it's broken by this kind of indistinct dark eye line. So you've really got these two eye arcs. It's a good thing to look for to help you identify an orange-crowned warbler. There are also some different subspecies of orange-crowned warblers, including some that have really gray heads, like contrasting gray heads. So that's something to look for as well. This is an extreme example, I would say. This is sort of a more typical subspecies of orange-crowned warbler that we'd see a lot of around here. Has a relatively sharp beak, like I don't know, warblers have, you know, they all have sort of a long, thin beak, but if you pay attention to it, there are differences. And in the case of the orange-crowned warbler, it's very pointy. It looks like if you got poked with an orange-crowned warbler beak, it would hurt, maybe more so than some of the other warblers. Another view of the orange-crowned warbler. Here's a view. This is kind of fun. So this actually shows you the orange crown, which is something I've only seen in the field a few times. It's not a obvious feature, and you can only sometimes see it. And this bird is obviously feeding nestlings because it's carrying food. You know, if it were just normally foraging for those caterpillars, it would just eat them, right? But it's not eating them. It's gathering them to take somewhere else, and presumably that somewhere else is a nest that it will where it will stuff those into the mouths of its young. Here's sort of what I'm used to seeing more in terms of the gray-headed version of it. Kind of looks like this. Here's another one. All right, so hopefully by now you're getting a level of familiarity with these orange-crowned warblers, right? And if you're not familiar with them yet, go bird watching, because we have a lot of them around here and you can usually find them. Let's see. Oh, and we should listen to them. So I believe I set this up so you could hear. Tell me if you hear this, or is that audible? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear the orange-crowned warbler singing. Excellent. And I want to keep moving. So here are some calls. So like a lot of warblers, they have this call note that's just sort of a chip like this. But with practice, you can learn to pick out, at least if you have a limited number of warblers locally that you're trying to sift through, you can pick out that orange-crowned chip note. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to skip the local sightings. That was an eBird map with the pins, but you can go to eBird and you can see where people have been reporting orange-crowned warblers locally, because I want to show this animation because I really love these. So this gives you this great look at where the population of orange-crowned warblers is throughout the year. As you can see, they really cover a lot of ground. Here they are in their wintering range. Then they go on into their breeding range, on breeding all the way up into Alaska. And we just happen to be in this really cool spot where we actually have them throughout the year. There's just a little tiny strip of coastal land there where we are in Santa Barbara, where we have them all the time. So in the winter, when folks in, I don't know, New York are pining for warblers, we still have them. So that's cool. Okay, I'm going to move on to this species, the common yellowthroat. And at least in the adult male, it's very distinctive with that yellow throat and that black mask. It's hard to mistake it for something else. Now the female is a little trickier because she doesn't have the mask. This one has a really yellow throat. They don't always have that bright yellow a throat, so you definitely want to look for different things about it. This is what I would think more as a typical female look, or at least a drabber bird. They say immature female. One thing to focus on is there is this contrast, like the throat is relatively light and the rest of the head is relatively dark, and there's a distinct border between the two of them. That's a good characteristic to look for in a non-adult male common yellowthroat to help you identify it. Here again is sort of the, you know, the more challenging version of the common yellowthroat to identify. I play their sound. So their song is quite distinctive. And there's some variations to it, but that's the basic kind of common yellowthroat song. Witchetty, witchetty, witchetty is the mnemonic I recall from my field guides. And then their chip. So here it's definitely a different kind of note than that orange-crowned warbler chip. I think of it as a thicker chip. I don't know how to really describe its characteristics, but when you look at the sonogram, you can see it's more of an unmusical kind of thick vertical line. All right, well, we're going to keep on rolling because we have many warblers to look at. Oh, let's look at the animation. Again, I can't resist looking at these maps because I think they're just the coolest thing. So here is the common yellowthroat in winter, so in January. You see, so it winters in Florida, some along the Gulf Coast. And again, we have just a few of them. They make up into our neck of the woods here. And then we'll start the animation and you'll see that they spread out dramatically. They really like wet habitats. They like, you know, reeds and sedges and marshy areas. And there's plenty of those to be found in the areas that they spread into for their breeding season. But again, we are fortunate in that here on the south coast of Santa Barbara County, we have them year round. Okay, let's keep on rolling to this species, the yellow warbler, the aptly named yellow warbler, because it is in fact quite yellow. So this is an adult male. And when you see those adult males with the kind of reddish streaks, it's just a very distinctive bird. You know, it's hard to mistake that for anything else. But they don't always have that. Right? Especially in the fall, when there's a lot of immature ones, you're going to see a lot of yellow warblers that are less dramatically set off that way. But one thing you will see if you look at yellow warblers is the underside of the tail is very yellow. And that's an important distinction. You know, none of the other warblers we have around here really have this tail pattern where it's yellow under the tail like that, especially in the center of the tail. And you know, this part of a warbler is a part that you see a lot because again, they're up in the top of a tree and you're craning your head and you don't always see the whole bird like this. You know, sometimes you just see a little piece of the bird. And a lot of times the piece that you see is the tail. So it's definitely worth paying attention to this part of the warbler in your field guides because that's the part you're going to see a lot. And they do tend to be pretty distinctive in that area. There's some really useful field marks to look for there. All right, here is an adult female yellow warbler. You can see it's got a thin beak, but it's not as pointy as that orange-crowned warbler beak, not as sharp. It's more of like a swollen beak, you know, it kind of carries its thickness a little further forward. It's not quite as painful if you get poked with it. You see the yellow tail here. There's actually yellow linings on the wings, which is also a yellow warbler feature. And this very plain sort of face, that's worth paying attention to. You know, it's really got pretty much a uniform yellow across the whole face here. And there's a lot of variation in how yellow a yellow warbler is. Like there's probably some more examples here. Oh, okay. This is a subspecies we don't have around here. And if you see one of these, that would be very exciting. But they live down in Latin America. Like this is a bird in Costa Rica where this photo was taken. But here's an example of well, this is in I'm not even sure we have this subspecies around here either. This is from La Paz in Baja, but much less yellow. But again, the whole face is fairly plain there. Pay no attention to this bird. We will not see this bird. Here's an example of a bird you might see, a version of the yellow warbler that you might see. Again, so a fairly plain face, a little bit of a light eye ring sometimes you will see on a yellow warbler if you get a real close look. Again, the yellow edging on the feathers in the wings. Can't quite see the underside of the tail, but if you could see that there's yellow there. These are all good signs you're looking at a yellow warbler. The proportions are pretty helpful too. It's got a relatively short tail. It's a relatively chunky warbler. I mean, for a warbler, it's a fairly big warbler. I mean, warblers are small birds, but some warblers are smaller than others. And yellow warblers are on the big side for a warbler. Here, immature yellow warbler without so much yellow. And again, an adult male. An adult male singing. They're just great birds. They're very cool to look at. I say this is an adult male. The streaking is not as obvious in this one, but again, you can see enough there to say, okay, that's a yellow warbler. And that dark eye in that big plain yellow face. It's a good sign you're looking at a yellow warbler. And and let's listen to them real quick. So the mnemonic I've heard for its song is sweet, 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 a little more sweet. It's got that pattern. Again, there's variation, but it's got that sort of pattern with that little phrase at the end. And you definitely hear that a lot. Like they nest in willows, they tend to be. And so you'll hear that song in riparian habitat in our part of the world a lot at this time of year. Yeah, I'm gonna keep on. I'm not gonna play other examples of their songs. Yeah, I'll look at the migration animation real quick. So you can see here, they really don't winter. They winter south of here. They don't really winter around here. Just a few that the Christmas scouting effort usually manages to stake out. But for the most part, they are not here, and then they are for the breeding season, and then they leave again. And you can see they go all over. They spread out all across North America. And in the fall migration, a lot of those birds that we're breeding up here come through our part of the world. So you will see a lot of yellow warblers in the fall. That's why that eBird histogram really swells in those fall months. And let's talk about this last one. So the last of the 4 local breeders, the Wilson's warbler. And so in the adult male, that black cap, if you can see it, is really helpful in distinguishing it because it's otherwise kind of like a yellow warbler. It's yellow, it's a warbler. If you see that black cap, you're talking about a Wilson's. Its beak is shorter than the yellow warbler's beak. This one's got its head turned towards us, so it looks especially short. But even if it's more in profile, you can see that's not quite as long a beak as a yellow warbler's beak. And another thing you'll see in a Wilson's warbler, so it says this is female or immature. It doesn't have the full-on black cap, but it still has like a light eyebrow, like a yellow eyebrow that's contrasting with the area below there, and even with the cap. And a yellow warbler really doesn't have that, right? The yellow warbler is really going to have more of an undifferentiated shade of either yellow or sort of pale yellow, depending on the yellow warbler you're looking at. But it's going to be pretty much the same shade across the face. And for a Wilson's warbler, it's going to have more of a, it's a subtle kind of thing, but there's an eye line there a lot of times. There's a darker cheek and a lighter eyebrow. Not eye line, eyebrow. It's above the eye line. The eye line would be through the eye, but eyebrow is above the eye, the supercilium. Okay. Good look at the male, which again is conveniently easy to identify. Here again, not so much. You might look at this bird and think, oh, is that a yellow warbler? Even if you didn't see those bits of black there, you can see a little bit of that faint face pattern I'm talking about, where this area is darker and then there's this lighter supercilium, this lighter eyebrow. Here's one that shows us I guess we don't have one that shows us the tail. If you could see the underside of the tail, you'd see that it does not have, you can kind of see it here. The underside of the tail is dark. It's not yellow, right? The undertail coverts at the base of the tail are yellow, but then once you hit the tail feathers proper, they're not yellow the way a yellow warbler's tail would be. We'll probably see some examples of that later. Okay, so enough for those 4 species that breed here. Gonna zip along now, and again, I'm running out of time, so we're gonna go pretty quick through the rest of these warblers. The wintering species. So we have 2 species of warblers that don't breed here, but very much are here in the non-breeding season, in the winter months. And that's our yellow-rumped warbler, which can have a bunch of different looks. This is just one of them. And the Townsend's warbler, which is really just a stunning bird. And if you look at their eBird histograms, you see that they're not breeding here. They're going somewhere else to breed, right? But they're very much here in the winter. In fact, in the case of the yellow-rumped warbler, that's one of the thickest bars you're going to see in an eBird histogram. Like, you can't go bird watching without seeing or hearing some yellow-rumped warblers at that time of year. Okay, so we'll do a quick scan. And again, we have a whole meeting on yellow-rumped warblers. So if you want to have a lot more detail on how to identify them, go look through the meeting archives at carpbirdwatchers.org and watch that meeting. Rebecca Coulter was our guest in that meeting. So you got extra special warbler content because Rebecca is amazing. But here is an adult male of the myrtle subspecies that we have relatively few of. Here is the adult male of the Audubon subspecies, which we have a lot of. And in the spring, they start to look like this. You'll start to see versions of it. They're like, wow, what a bold warbler. Well, it's the same one we've had throughout the winter, except they're looking even more special now because they're in their breeding finery. This is a subspecies that lives to the south that we don't get here. But if you travel, you might be lucky enough to see one of these. Here's a female of the myrtle, the eastern subspecies. Female of the Audubons, the one we have more of around here. The subspecies of the yellow-rumped warbler. Then the Goldmans, which we don't really see around here. Immature myrtle. And the hybrid, very fun. Female myrtle. Female Audubons. Give me an immature Audubons. They're not going to give me an immature Audubons. That's okay. But in the fall and the winter months, we'll see a lot of these more drably plumaged birds, a lot of the first-year birds that are actually quite brownish. But you'll see that little yellow under the bend of the wing is a really great way to identify them as a yellow-rumped warbler. If you see their rump, it's yellow, and that'll be helpful. I'm going to skip their song. We don't really hear them singing so much here. They sing. You'll hear them singing a little bit before they leave in the spring. You hear their chip notes a lot, and certainly you'll get a lot of experience with that chip note. Their migration, I can't resist these migration animations. If we have no time left for anything else except these animations, I'm going to show these animations. So this is what yellow-rumped warblers are doing throughout the year. And you'll see that, you know, unlike a lot of warbler species in North America, they winter fairly far north. Like, there's a lot of the country, this whole southern belt here, where they are wintering when almost all the other warbler species have gone further south. I mean, the warblers that are very dependent on insects, they really need to head south, you know, into the tropics where there's a lot of insects to feed on in the winter. What the yellow-rumped warbler does, and some of the other species that winter further north, is they can also eat fruit. So the myrtle warbler, the eastern subspecies of the yellow-rumped warbler, is named because they eat wax myrtle, the berries of wax myrtle. And in the wintertime, you'll see them eating that a lot. They'll also eat nectar. And I think I've got a photo. Yeah, so here is Okay, so here is an immature, like a first year yellow-rumped warbler around here. And you see this thing going on with its face. It's like, you think like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with that poor warbler? Well, the only thing wrong with that warbler is that it's been stuffing its face into eucalyptus blossoms to eat nectar. And it gets like sticky nectar all over its face. And Townsend's warblers and yellow-rumped warblers, the fact that they can winter around here is in part because we have these groves of eucalyptus trees have been planted in Southern California. And a lot of them flower in those seasons, and these warblers will drink the nectar. And that helps them get through those months when insects are harder to come by. And if you see that on their faces, that's what they've been doing. They've been eating nectar. All right, and then Townsend's warbler, which is a really just stunning bird. And when I talked about how the eastern North American bird watchers have more warbler species than we do, and they get to have these huge mixed flock migrations, but they don't have Townsend's warblers. So if they want to see them, they've got to come here. Or occasionally there's a vagrant Townsend's warbler that shows up back there and they all lose their minds like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful warbler. Like, yeah, they are pretty cool. And we see them all the time. So here's a male. The black throat sets it off as a male. Here's a female or an immature, so it doesn't have the black throat. But again, it has that oval, that dark oval cheek patch outlined with this thick yellow area. A little bit of a yellow arc under the eye. These are good things to look for to recognize a Townsend warbler. Yellow on the breast with dark streaking on the sides. These are all Townsend's warbler things. There's a young one, but still has that same sort of oval dark patch, oval dark cheek patch. Again, a young Townsend's warbler. It's an interesting looking one. There we go, Townsend's warblers. You will occasionally hear them singing. Again, before they have departed, they'll be practicing their songs. Oh, you know what? Let me go back, because that was where the songs were. You sometimes hear that song locally in the spring. And if you track down the singer, you go, oh my gosh, it's a Townsend's warbler. We'll look at their migration animation. Just a few of them in the winter. This little pocket hangs out on our coast. But then in the summer, they're all up here breeding, right? They all disappear. And mostly they're wintering down in Mexico, but again, a little bit along the Pacific coast. And not inland at all. Like if you go, you know, even just a few hundred miles inland, you're out of the wintering range of the Townsend's warbler. All right, on we go to our last group. So these are species seen mainly during migration. So, and these are harder to see. You know, you've got to work more as a Santa Barbara County birder to get these species. And you can see from their histograms, you know, a nice swelling in April, but right about where we are, we're like, you know, third week of May here. The clock has kind of run out on some of these. Like if you can find a Nashville warbler now, you're doing a really good job in Santa Barbara County because they're mostly gone. Black-throated gray warbler, better chance. They're still coming. There's still a few of them around. Hermit warbler, yeah, there might still be a few. If you work at it, you could see them. And then there's some black-throated gray around during the breeding months. But then the next good chance to see these is going to be in the fall, and they'll come through again on their way back from wherever they were. So there's a Nashville warbler. Again, this is its histogram. The black-throated gray warbler. And the hermit warbler. Its big plain yellow face and its black throat in the male. All right, so let's talk about the Nashville really quick. See some versions of that. So the Nashville warbler, bright yellow throat, contrasting with this gray head, more of an olive upper parts other than that, and then a really prominent white eye ring, you know, a complete white eye ring. So that combo, if you see that around here, gray head, yellow throat, prominent white eye ring, otherwise olive and yellow below, probably looking at a Nashville warbler. Here's a more drab one. This is the female, but again, she's got basically the same pattern, just not quite as bold about it. But that yellow on the throat, contrasting with the rest of the head with this sort of gray hood. You know, there are a number of other warbler species that have sort of a gray hood and a white eye ring, but they're not going to have this yellow throat along with it. So look for that. Again, still yet drabber in this immature bird. But again, that prominent white eye ring really helps. Another cool look. And there's the bold adult version of the Nashville warbler. All right, I'm going to zip quickly and go right to their animation so you can kind of see where they're found. So as you see, we do not have them in the winter months. In the first week of January, they're all down here in Mexico. No sightings up here in North America. Then we get into like April, whoo, we got a bunch of them, and then none of them, at least where we are here. And then the fall, oh, we got a few more, and then none of them. So really, migration is when you're going to be able to see these birds. So if you want to see a Nashville warbler, and I highly encourage you to see a Nashville warbler because they're very cool to look at, you got to have your timing right. You got to be there at the right time. All right, black-throated gray warbler. I think these are just amazingly cool looking birds. There's another warbler, the black and white warbler, that sort of has a lot of black and white striping going on, but it's a little different than the black-throated gray. It's also rarer than more rare than the black-throated gray around here. So a lot of times birdwatchers might see this bird and think, oh, it's black and it's white. Oh, hey, there's this bird called a black and white warbler. Yeah, it kind of looks like that. No, they're different birds. They both have a lot of black and white, but the black-throated gray is distinctive. We'll talk about the black and white warbler when we do our Warblers Part 2 talk. But for now, this little yellow pip in front of the eye, you're not always going to see that, but if you do see it, it's a lock. You've got a black-throated gray warbler. It does have a gray back. You know, the black and white warbler has zebra stripes that continue onto the back, which the black-throated gray does not have. But it's just, I just think it's a really gorgeous bird. Here's the adult male. Here's the female. So in like a lot of the other warblers we've been looking at, the female does not have the black throat that the male has. So see the white there, the female, but otherwise looks a lot like the male. And here's a young one. And again, an adult male. I'm basically out of time, so we're going to zip right along. We get to our final species, the hermit warbler, which again, I just think is a gorgeous bird. Big yellow face with a black throat in the adult male. Hard to mistake it for anything else. Here's an adult female, similar look, but again, doesn't have the black throat. Here's an immature bird. You can kind of see that pattern, but again, not as boldly colored as the adults. Another immature bird. You see in almost all these photos, it's in conifers. They like conifers. So if you're looking at a pine tree that has a bird like this in it, that's a helpful clue. You might be looking at a hermit warbler. But I just think they're very cool. And here is their range animation. So again, not here so much in the winter months. And then they move through here during migration, but then they breed further north. And this again is another one of those species that the eastern bird watchers can only dream of seeing, but we get to see them out here. So take that, you eastern bird watchers, with you. Black Bernie and warblers and all your other cool birds you have out there that we don't have so much of. All right, so I believe that is it. We made it through our 9 warbler species. Woohoo! So, I apologize. Because I was so focused on the clock, I just like motor mouthed my way through this. I was like a warbler, right? I was very active and very, engaged and just chattering constantly, but didn't give you a chance to really get a word in edgewise. Any questions or comments about warblers? You are all muted, so feel free to unmute and just jump in there. Paul, you look like you might be willing to say something. Everyone else is so shy.
Where have you seen the hermit warbler?
The hermit warbler. You know what? Let me share my screen again really fast because I can show you where the sightings are. Here, we will back up. Are you seeing my screen? Yeah, thumbs up. Okay. We'll go to the eBird map. So these pins show you places that hermit warblers have been reported just this year, and the red pins are in the last 30 days. So yeah, Toro Canyon Park. I had one on April 28th. And, again, this is the kind of view you're going to get of warblers a lot of the time. They're up in the foliage, they're feeding, they're moving around. If you see one at close range and eye level, that's a treat and certainly worth remembering. But I've found that using my camera is very helpful. So I can kind of freeze that brief glimpse I got and then really study that bird later on. But that was at Toro Canyon Park that I saw that bird. Let's see. And then some other places it's been seen lately. I think this is Ramiro Canyon. Yep. Yeah, a number of us saw it there. This is up at Ramiro Saddle. Oh, that's right. This was the first one I saw this year. Bradley Hacker and I were up there trying to see one of these morning flights, which did not materialize on this day, which, that's the way it is a lot of times. But the day was saved for me because Bradley says, oh yeah, there's a hermit warbler over there. And I was able to get some quick photos of this nice male hermit warbler. All right.
Thank
any
you.
other?
Thank you.
Oh,
I
yeah,
know
no.
you got to go, but thank you very much.
Thank
Great.
you. And thank you, everybody. Hope to see some of you on Saturday. We can go check out those plovers. They are adorable. The little hatchlings are there, the little cute as a button little puffballs on sticks. Very worth going to see those. And I hope we have a lot more of them, the snowy plovers we have out there. And you still have a chance to see some cool migrant warblers for another week or two, maybe, if you get out there. Then you're going to be stuck with the breeding species, which are, again, nothing to sneeze at. They're quite attractive birds. And then in the fall, we'll have our big exciting time when we have not only the migrants coming back through, but a decent chance at some of the rarer species. So because warblers are long-range migrants, they have a fair amount of vagrancy that happens where a bird that's migrating just goes off in the wrong direction. And you can see a Blackburnian warbler in the fall sometimes if you're lucky in Santa Barbara County and some of these other eastern species. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Hope to see you out there. And I'll talk to you all later.